The topic of today's conversation is determining if a person's web browser can accept session cookies that I've set in a programming language called PHP. And the way that I'm handling form processing on this page is it utilizes a PHP session, and so that they'll have to accept cookies for this whole thing to work. Otherwise, if they try to enter in a comment and if there was an error, it'll come back to this page since I'm using header redirects, and their comment will be gone because I wasn't able to establish a session in the first place. Now there's two ways of going about detecting to see if they accept cookies. The first way is to use JavaScript in their web browser to see if they accepted, or to see if they can actually see the cookie that I've set from PHP. The second way of doing it is to use the web server programming language itself to detect if I can actually see the cookie that I've set in their web browser. The easier way to go about doing it is through JavaScript, but due to certain limitations that I've put on the cookie, that is that you can't access it through JavaScript because I use a HTTP only attribute on the cookie. I will have to do the server side or backend approach of using the web server programming language, but I'll go over both because I think using JavaScript is the easier way. And the time markers on the screen that you see right now are like positions where you can jump ahead to the server side approach or the backend approach if you want to skip ahead to that part and not have to worry about the JavaScript part. Taking a look at the client-side JavaScript approach first, this is the video.php file, the source code behind it. One of the first things I do in the PHP programming language is call session_start, which will actually send the cookie to the client's web browser. After it's finished doing that, it'll process the PHP code that I have in here and send the rest of the HTML document to the person's web browser. After the content's loaded, it'll see that, oh, there's an onload handler on the body tag. And so it will actually run the JavaScript onload handler. And in here, I can check to see if they've accepted the session cookie or not. One way to determine if in JavaScript to see if they've accept cookies is to do a navigator.cookie enabled, which would return true if they accept cookies. It would return false if they don't accept cookies. And that would be the perfect thing to call if it worked all of the time. But unfortunately, with certain web browsers, they'll return true when they don't accept cookies. So can't use that. So I'll play off the fact that I know that I'm sending a session cookie to their web browser, and I know what the name of it is, so I can check to see if they've accepted it or not. If I do an alert on document.cookie, what that will do is that'll print out the cookies that the web browser knows about, and it's treated as a string. If I have multiple cookies, they would be separated with semicolons. And in here I see the PHP session ID, which is the session ID cookie that was set when I did a session_start with the value after it. So I can look for this PHP session ID using JavaScript. So I can call it index of, which essentially does a substring search. So if I want to find a string within another string, so if I want to look for PHP session ID within the document.cookie string, I can do this, but the session ID may change. It may not be called that. I could change the web server defaults and it would cause this not to work. So I'll do some inline PHP and do an echo on session_name. which will give me the name of the session ID cookie. So if I do an alert on that, refresh, I get back a 0, which indicates that it found PHP session ID at the beginning of the string. In JavaScript, the first character of a string is position 0. Now, if I were to disable cookies on the web browser, which indicates that they don't accept them, I'll uncheck this accept cookies from sites checkbox. Refresh the page again, it's now returned a -1, which means it couldn't find the string PHP session ID in their cookies. So I'll change the alert to detect to see if the index of PHP session ID returns a -1, indicating that it could not find it. And if it couldn't find it, I'll add a nice message just above the form. Now I'll add a placeholder div with an ID of warning. I'll locate the warning div, and in it I'll set the inner HTML equal to please enable cookies on your web browser. I'll also need to check to see if the warning tag exists, or the warning ID exists. I'll do a document get element by ID of warning. And if it doesn't exist, what will happen is that it will return null. So if it is not null, which means it does exist, I'll go set the message. Refreshing the web page, I now see this nice message saying please enable cookies on your web browser. Probably also good if I didn't show the form at all, because the form won't work the way I want it to. And the way I have the form set up is I have it form name is equal to add_comment. So I need to do a document.getElements by name, and I'll give it the add_comment name. And that actually returns what's called a node list, which can be treated as an array. So I can do an index of 0 to get the first element, which it's the only form with that name on this web page. So it's going to be the first thing that's returned. And I'll set the style.display is equal to none, which would in effect make the form disappear. So I'll refresh it again, and now the form is gone, and it just says please enable cookies on your web browser. And I'll also, similar to the warning, I'll check to see if it exists first, and I'll check to see if the length of the node list that's returned is greater than 0 before I try to index into it.